This week on Between the Links, we put a bow on UFC 240 with Max Holloway's title defense over Frankie Edgar. Was the panel more impressed by Cris Cyborg's win or Felicia Spencer's performance in a loss? And where does Cris Cyborg go from here after the last fight on her UFC contract? Then we play a brand new game called Do You Believe Dana White When He Says Blank? All that and much more coming up tonight on Between the Links. Everybody, welcome to a brand new episode of Between the Links on the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network and now on the Loudmouth MMA YouTube channel. If you haven't seen it, it looked fantastic when we rolled it out last week thanks to our good friend John Franklin, and we appreciate all of his hard work for sure, so make sure you follow him on Twitter at smcornerman. Make that happen. He does tremendous work all around and helping out the show in a big way. But UFC 240 is in the books, and as always, we have a lot to get to, so let us introduce the panel. First, we have Keith Schillen here, who just loves a good regional promotional main event announcement. Don't you, Keith?
Yeah, I do. I love regional MMA. Listen, I say you brought it up. Let's just bring it up. I hate when regional MMA set a fighter up, and I hate that no one argues against it. Everyone says, "Oh, this card's so great." I'm like the only person in the world to be like, stop setting people up. So yeah, if you're doing that, stop doing it. And if you're a media member, stop kissing these people's asses and saying it's great. And what a stacked card. Like, stop doing it.
Well, where can we find your great work, sir?
I write for SureDog. I write for Cage Side Press, and I write for Fansided. And I have a podcast with the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network.
All right. We also have the always festive, fun-loving Canadian, Craig Allen, is back on the program. Good evening, Gregory. How are you, sir?
I'm not bad. I spent the weekend in good old TO. Got to see the Blue Jays win and lose. Got to try not to catch a home run behind me, which I did not. And I mean, enjoyed that. You can find my stuff, Fight Night Picks, at Craig Allen on FNP. And more to. We keep making some decent picks. We're 18 out of 20 so far, so looking forward to that kind of stuff.
You had mentioned in the chat, which nobody saw, that you're having trouble popping in and out and things skipping. You sounded like you were stuttering quite a bit there, Craig. So we may have to have you pop in and out, and I don't know what we're gonna do, but we'll just roll with it at this point, and if we have to stop tape and recontinue, we'll do that. But moving forward, we have Davidson Baker joining the show. I know he's ready to rock and roll. He's got a fresh haircut. How are you, man?
Ready to rock and roll. Only thing I left was the Baker Mayfield jersey off my back because I'm feeling dangerous. Always a pleasure to join these guys. And also, friend of the old version of this show when I hosted it, Mr. Michael Fiedel. You had to appear on that show like 6 or 7 times, right?
Yeah, it was fun.
Yes. Plug away there, Davidson.
Fansided, Cage Side Press, My MMA News. You like MMA, you get on the internet, you'll see it somewhere if you follow me in any capacity.
Yes, you can. And our special guest this week has become close personal friends with the likes of Luke Thomas recently. So it's good we get him on now before he gets too big for the program. But in all seriousness, he has done a terrific job with his reporting, poking some holes in organizations like One Championship, Battlefield FC, and others. And he's been killing it, man. And I'm happy to say he's a colleague of mine for a couple of different outlets. We have Michael Fiedel, the aforementioned Michael Fiedel, on the program. Welcome to the show. Let everyone know where to find your great work.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's great to be on the show with everyone. For some of you, great to be on the show again with you, but the first time on the iteration Between the Links. Everyone can find my work over at The Body Lock or on Flow Combat.
All right. Do we have Craig back yet?
Yeah, I'm back. Can you hear me?
You sound like $1 million. You are very close up now. All right. Hopefully, John can make this work. He is the producer extraordinaire. But in terms of the program, if you want a full list of rules, head back to the early shows in the archives because I'm not going to go through the whole thing. But the rebuttal clause is in effect. Each panelist can call for a rebuttal one time apiece throughout the duration of regulation. And you gentlemen can do that within the chat. But other than that, let us dive right into it. Let's talk about Saturday. The main event of UFC 240 featured a featherweight title fight between Max Holloway and Frankie Edgar. And the fight, in my opinion, was as interesting as I expected it to be. It was a chess match. There was a lot of feints. It was just a fun technical fight, which saw Max Holloway pick up a unanimous decision win. 2 judges gave him the clean sweep. The other gave Frankie 2 rounds, which is just kind of outlandish to me. But I actually scored the fight 49-46 for Max Holloway. But anyways, there's many ways we could go with this question, but I wanted to make this interesting and cast more of a thinner net, so to speak. So Dana White was asked at the post-fight presser if Max Holloway has surpassed BJ Penn as the greatest fighter to come from Hawaii, and he was hesitant to give him the nod on Saturday night. So I'm going to pose that same question to you, gentlemen. Did Max Holloway's win over Frankie Edgar on Saturday solidify him as the best fighter ever from Hawaii over BJ Penn, who had this incredible run at 155 pounds for a good long while there? Craig, Al, we're going to start with you.
All right, so you got me up close and personal. Don't know what's going on. We're going with the old cell phone right now. So realistically, you look at it and you can look at it in quite a few different ways. I mean, BJ Penn fought at welterweight, fought at 55, held titles in both. He had a great run in his prime. Now, we're talking about guys being in their prime. You look at Max Holloway, he sits at 1,937 total strikes given. Those are total significant strikes given. He's above Frankie Edgar. You look at BJ Penn, he's in number 5 right now. You look at this as, a totality of a career. Max Holloway right now, as it stands, is at his best. We're all going to remember him currently as the guy who is the best from Hawaii. And then we also have to worry about the fact that Dana White's talking about BJ Penn being, on such short leash. He has one fight left. So realistically, a lot of people are going to remember him right now as the guy who's won 9-1 in his last 11, whereas Max Holloway's on an absolute tear. And I mean, he's only lost to the best of the best. Seconds. So it's that recency bias that's going to have me believe that, Max Holloway is the best fighter from Hawaii.
Davidson, your thoughts on this?
Craig noted the recency bias is real here, and it definitely has to be, being that if you're going to compare BJ Penn to Max Holloway in any capacity, it would make sense if you're talking about the greatest fighter from whatever sector to talk about prime BJ Penn versus prime Max Holloway. And no, it wasn't the win over Frankie that led me to think Max is the greatest fighter in Hawaiian history. It was the win over Ortega and the time he beat Aldo twice and the Pettis win. I don't think I need to continue here. Hell, I mean, the fighter that prompted this question, a guy 2 judges thought didn't take a single round from Max Holloway, beat BJ Penn twice. And this is all pre-7-fight losing streak BJ Penn. I want to just continue to beat that narrative to death. If I'm comparing Max Holloway right now to BJ Penn in his prime, it's hard for me still not to lean with Max. You could argue that he's fought tougher competition. The difference in eras is
10 seconds.
A debate that will never be settled. However, Max at his peak won 13 fights in a row. BJ Penn in his prime, his longest win streak was only 4. I'd have to go with Max here. I think that he's undoubtedly the greatest fighter to ever come from Hawaii.
Michael, are you on Team Holloway or Team Penn with this one?
Well, I'm torn because in your question, you started the phrase with the greatest fighter from Hawaii and then ended the phrase with the best fighter from Hawaii. And I think that's a distinction that we need to make here. Obviously, BJ Penn has, I wouldn't say the best legacy because in recent years, things have kind of gone off the rails. The losing streak, the winless streak, if you want to take the draw into account, and recent outside the cage controversies that are still kind of unfolding in the media. I think BJ is clearly the greater fighter in terms of greatness and the legacy. First American to win at the World Championships in Jiu-Jitsu, moved up and down in weight classes before anyone else was really doing it. But I do think that mixed martial arts is such a rapidly evolving sport that we've progressed so quickly with Holloway. And Holloway now is a better iteration of almost any fighter we've seen to date. His striking volume is amazing. His pressure is amazing. And I think 2 stats really encapsulate this whole argument. Max Holloway has the most significant strikes landed in the UFC in history and is over 500, I believe 500, ahead of Frankie Edgar, who's in second.
10 seconds.
BJ Penn has taken the most significant strikes in UFC history.
Keith, your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, you're asking me a question has Max Holloway surpassed a guy that's losing fights to Dennis freaking Seaver? I mean, Mike, I don't know what the hell he's talking about. He's talking about, is it best? Is it greatest? Boring you with, definitions. Neither one of them is the greatest Hawaiian fighter ever. Travis Brown is. We forget about him? No, let's be serious. BJ Penn was phenomenal. I mean, you're talking about a guy that was so unbelievably skilled. His pocket boxing was crazy. The first American to win a world championship in BJJ. He might be the most flexible fighter ever in UFC. and his willingness to fight anybody at any weight kind of builds his credibility. I mean, he's done that. But you know who else is willing to do that? Max Holloway. Now, my man over here, Craig, was like talking. He pulled out some stat, 12,000, this, that. Like, every week he comes up with some boring-ass stat that no one cares about. Listen, let me give you some stats that people actually care, and it's easy to follow. Max Holloway has 17 wins in the UFC. BJ Penn has 12. Max Holloway, who's 27 years old, he has 3 title defenses already. BJ Penn, in his entire career, only had 3. Their records in title bouts. Max Holloway is 5-1. BJ Penn is 5-1 in title matches. People forget that BJ Penn didn't win the lightweight title to his 3rd try. Max Holloway had a 13
minus 4 seconds.
The most BJ Penn only had was 3. And he's 27 years old. He's still with 27 years old. BJ Penn still didn't even win the lightweight title. Listen, I take more time because I don't bore people with Davison like going around in circles. I'm making up for what they should have said.
All right, so I'm gonna go back to you, Keith, but I just want you to throw the numbers at me. All right, you can say the name. How did you score the fight?
The fight between Max Holloway and Frankie Edgar?
Yes.
I scored it 49-46. I'm okay with 50-45, but I scored it 49-46.
Michael, how'd you score it?
5-0 for Holloway.
Davidson?
50-45 Max.
Greg?
I had it round 1 for Edgar and the last 4 for Holloway.
All right, so very good answers. Keith came out guns blazing, took 45 extra seconds. But because it was so close, I'm going to give the nod to Davidson Baker because his Skype connection is crystal clear. He sounds amazing. The microphone is on point. So I'm going to give Davidson the extra point. So 10 for Davidson and 9 for everybody else. But everyone had good arguments. So as we move on to the next question, Craig's face, because I see him so close, is like rolling his eyes a little bit. But there's a couple of themes tonight on the program as we head to the next question, and one of which has to do with Cris Cyborg, who defeated a very gritty, a very game, and a very tough Canadian in Felicia Spencer in the co-main event on Saturday night. And it was a fun fight for sure. It got really interesting at different points in the fight. I actually had scored it 30-26 for Cyborg, but no matter how it was scored by anybody, the stock on both ladies rose tremendously. It was a really interesting fight, but we're going to get into the other newsy piece as regards to Cris Cyborg in a little bit. But Davidson, we're going to start with you here. Were you impressed more by Cris Cyborg's performance in a win or more impressed with Felicia Spencer's performance in the loss?
It's hard for me to answer this question directly just because I don't know if impressed is the term I would use on either side. What was impressive about Felicia Spencer? Well, she cut Cyborg. Okay, that's one thing. And she took her all 3 rounds. That's another thing. And Cyborg landed the most strikes that she has ever landed in a Zuffa fight. I'm talking all the way back to the Elite XC days. 122 total significant strikes, even more so than she landed in 5 rounds against Holly Holm, is what she landed on Felicia Spencer, rather. So I don't know how impressed I can be with Felicia Spencer, given, yeah, she was tough, yeah, she was gritty, yeah, she took some huge shots, but did she check a leg kick? 20 out of 21 leg kicks thrown by Cris Cyborg connected. And as far as Cyborg is concerned, I read someone tweet it or somebody coined this narrative, promptly right after the fight. Does that Cris Cyborg beat Amanda Nunes? It's hard to imagine a world in which she does. So, like I said, impressed. It's hard for me to be impressed with on either side, just because of all of the information available and all of the data compiled.
Michael, your thoughts on this? And what's interesting about Davidson's answer there is, one, this is Felicia Spencer's, that was like her 7th or 8th professional fight. And 2, if you said like 6 years ago that Cris Cyborg landed 122 strikes in a fight, you would think her opponent would be dead.
Yeah, you definitely would. And honestly, that's what I thought going into this fight would happen. So to answer your question, I guess I'm more impressed by Felicia Spencer's performance because like Davidson said, the elbow, like Davidson said, all 3 rounds, but more impressively, she survived. I thought when this fight was booked, it was a mismatch. I thought it was too much, too soon, and it was just a casualty of the UFC not having a division at featherweight. But Felicia Spencer went in there. She proved me wrong, proved a lot of other people wrong, and she ate Cyborg's best shots in a way that very few people have. And I guess one of the things that I was thinking about when you asked this question was, how can you not be impressed by Cris Cyborg? Like Davidson said, most strikes that she's landed in a fight, almost an unbelievable output with the leg kicks, not getting checked more than once. So how can you not be impressed with Cris Cyborg? And the answer to that is we've become so accustomed to Cyborg's unadulterated dominance and the early finishes and the knockouts where, to quote Jeremy Stevens, people don't even move, that anytime she goes past the first round or anytime she doesn't get a knockout, we look at it as if it's a failure on her part. And I think the bigger narrative coming out of this fight, because it was domination from Cyborg, is the contract status that I believe we'll touch on soon.
Keith, your thoughts on this? It was a very interesting fight. It was very fun, but were you more impressed with Cyborg in a victory or Spencer's grit and determination in the defeat?
Well, I want to jump on what Mike said because he actually said something really intelligent. He said when you're so dominant at something that people kind of grade you harder that way. It's like how me on this show, I'm so dominant that Mike grades me the hardest. I mean, we talked about the most head damage being BJ Penn. I think it might be Mike after giving Davis in the last round, and that was insane. You're asking me, like, am I impressed with Felicia Spencer that she landed one strike every 30 seconds? Look at it. Do the math. She landed one strike every 30 seconds. That's supposed to impress me. I was impressed by Cris Cyborg. This is a girl who's coming off a loss. Her first loss in 13 years, a knockout loss. I was worried that she might come out gun shy, and she didn't. As Davidson said, which he said wrong, by the way, he said the most strikes in Zuffa history. No, it was the most strikes she landed in her career, total. 122 strikes. Not only did she do it, she did it in 3 rounds. She passed what she landed on Holly Holm in 5 rounds. She went against a true featherweight, a top 5 featherweight, and we were dropping 10-8 rounds. And people are talking about, like, oh, she looks gassed, or she looks washed up, and all this stuff. George St. Pierre got knocked out by Matt Serra, and people, I know Craig probably wasn't even alive back then, but when George St. Pierre got knocked out, people said the same thing. Oh, is he done and this and that? I mean, she gets knocked out by the greatest women fighter in history, and now people are saying, people like Davidson, I can't imagine a world where Cris Cyborg beats Amanda Nunes. I mean, like 6 months ago, she was the favorite. 6 months ago, she was like the female Terminator. She was invincible. And now 6 months later, we can't come up with a world where she could. Yeah, you did say that. You can't come up with a world she beats Amanda Nunes. I can't imagine a world where Davidson wins this show.
Craig, I don't know how you follow up that George Costanza-esque performance, but go right ahead.
All right, I'm going to do some simple math that apparently Keith can't do because he can't open a website. So Felicia Spencer landed 64 total strikes in the fight. She landed 38 significant strikes in that fight. 15 divided by 64, she hit a total strike every 23 seconds, not every 3 seconds. So come on, that matters. It's a game of inches when it's not a 5-round fight and it's a 3-round fight. And that's very important because Cris Cyborg hasn't fought in a 3-round fight in forever. And she fought great in this 3-round fight. Why? Because she went back to the Cyborg of old. She wasn't as technical with her striking. She didn't defend as well as she has in the past. She just threw caution to the wind and got reckless. But wait. She also defended 8 takedown attempts. She looked great in that. We saw Yana Kunitskaya. We saw Tanya Evinger. Tanya Evinger hit a takedown against her, and Felicia Spencer wasn't able to. Why? I don't know, because that's what she trained with. You know, her wrestling coach, Tito Ortiz, he's pretty good for a soundbite. And listen, after this fight, we got great sound bites out of Cris Cyborg because she said, you know what? My time to shine, contract's up. And this is why she won. She held on to all those nasty things that people said about her. And now her and her team are on social media scouring through and just attacking everybody that's ever attacked her. So she did a great job in the cage. She's done a great job after the cage. Just like me with my poor connection on my iPhone against Keith in his beautiful little studio there.
To follow up, and Craig, we're going to stick with you on this. I want to get everybody's thoughts on this because there are a lot of people out there in Twitter land, and there were some journalists, there were some celebrities out there, some fans who thought that this fight between Cris Cyborg and Felicia Spencer should have gotten the fight of the night honors, which to me personally is outlandish because, yes, it was a good fight. No doubt about it. I was entertained by it. But in my opinion, it was the third, and you can even make the argument it was the 4th best fight on the card. That's my opinion. I want to hear yours, Craig. Should Cyborg Spencer have gotten a bonus over the flyweight fight between Figueiredo and Pantoja or Neal and Price?
Yeah, you don't really see many people getting fight of the night after they take that many significant strikes. And listen, it was great for Felicia Spencer. I listened to a podcast today. I won't name names, but they said that Felicia Spencer should fight for the title and Cris Cyborg should fight Megan Anderson. And I think that's absolutely laughable. If I look at this card, for me, Figueiredo Pantoja, that was the fight of the night. It was a great fight. It entertained people, and it had more people talking after the card because so many people said that Figueiredo Pantoja should have been on the main card and it shouldn't have been on the prelims. It wasn't even the main prelim, the one you try and sell people on ESPN, but that was the best fight of the night.
Keith, what do you think?
Well, I'm really thrown off right now. I just heard Craig say he listened to a podcast, and it clearly wasn't on the Loudmouth Podcast MMA website. We should immediately wipe away every single one of his points for that. I mean, that is pod adultery. That was terrible. Not to mention, he went after Tanya Everger's wrestling for something. Tanya Everger is the best wrestler Cris Cyborg ever did. Tanya Everger was an NCAA wrestler. Why are you acting so surprised that she got one takedown on Cris Cyborg? Like, that was, I mean, Kobe Covington might get a takedown on Robbie Love. I want Kobe Covington got a takedown. Yeah, it was, Tanya Everger was an NCAA wrestler. I mean, that was just ridiculous. Oh, I don't remember what your question was. Should she get an award? No, of course not. I mean, it was a one-sided shellacking. It's like what's going on in this competition right now. And you got, I mean, Figueiredo and Formiga, that fight was fantastic. And Craig is right. It should have been on the main card. And you know who said it last week? It should have been on the main card? Me. I said it. And, I mean, why is Jocko on the main card and stuff for that? I said Formiga. Sorry. It's oh, listen, I'm supposed to care about flyweights now. Listen, Formiga, it was more entertaining than Felicia Spencer. I don't know why we're getting who was he for? Oh, Pantoja. One Brazilian for another Brazilian flyweight. Yeah, sorry. I was sorry. I'm so thrown off by Craig's saying he listened to another podcast.
Oh, God. So now that the parade for Keith that was done by Keith is over, Michael, is there even an argument here?
No, I really don't. And I know the show, you're supposed to have your own takes, but I mean, everything's been said. It was a one-sided fight. The commentary may have told you otherwise, but that was a one-sided fight. Like you said, 30-26. And of course, you can't argue with the hashtag save the flyweights. And Jeff Neal, Nico Price was as good as advertised. I mean, there was a double knockdown. I mean, come on.
Davidson, I already know your answer on this, but enlighten me.
By way of a clash of heads, I might add to Michael's last point. However, I agree with you, Mike, and exactly what you said. The fourth, maybe even fifth. I mean, what about Hakeem Dawodu and Poirier, Yoshinori Poirier? That was a great fight for as long as it lasted, and a lot better, and at least in my opinion, a lot more competitive than Cyborg and Spencer were. I mean, I at least thought Poirier took the first round. That's not even to mention Neal and Price. That's not even to mention Pantoja and Figueiredo. You know, as Craig just mentioned a good point in our chat that won't even go mentioned, there were good fights on a pretty forgettable card, and you could even argue Aubin Mercier. Just I'm taking everybody's points here. I think giving them fight of the night would be laughable at best.
All right, good answers. Michael and Davidson, 19 points apiece. Keith and Craig with 18 points apiece. And now we continue with the Cris Cyborg theme because you knew we were going to touch on this. It's been mentioned a couple of times briefly. In terms of Cris Cyborg on the business side of the equation, her fight on Saturday night, as was mentioned, was the last on her most recent deal with the UFC. And everyone seems to want, including Dana White, it sounds like, the rematch between Cris Cyborg and Amanda Nunes for the women's featherweight title. But let's be honest here. The relationship between Cris Cyborg and the UFC, more so Cris Cyborg and Dana White, has been a rocky one from the very beginning, even before she signed with the UFC. From the Vanderlei Silva in a dress comment to Joe Rogan's comments on his podcast to some other things that have happened along the way. And it's been this way for an awful long time. However, for some reason, it has always seemed to work out at the end of the day between Cris Cyborg and the UFC. But Cris Cyborg has a lot of options in front of her from where I sit. You know, I don't know if Dana would cry a lot of tears at the end of the day if she went to Bellator or Ryzen or ONE or PFL or anywhere else at this point. So, Michael, we're going to start with you. Cyborg has talked about the constant bullying. She said she wants a public apology from Dana White, and I don't blame her for that one bit. But do you see a world where that actually happens? And, you know, in our opinion, everybody here, we'll start with you. Did we just watch Cris Cyborg's last fight in the UFC?
I think we did, and I think the reason for that stems from that request for a public apology. I think the only thing for Cyborg in the UFC is that fight with Amanda Nunes. She wants to get that loss back. She wants to kind of go back to the Terminator of old. And I think the Nunes fight presents that opportunity for her. But outside of that, I really don't see any reason for her to stay in the UFC. She can go to PFL, where she can cut less weight because their division is 155 pounds. And she would have, I think, the undoubted favorite spot in that tournament next year, with only Kayla Harrison, Sarah Kaufman, but Sarah Kaufman's a much smaller fighter, as the real threat there to her. And that's a $1 million prize in addition to the season payouts. And I also think that One Championship, who's been throwing a lot of money around lately, could make a play for Cyborg. But I think to call, I've seen a couple articles where they phrase this as a feud between Dana White and Cyborg. I think calling it a feud is ridiculous. If you look at what Cyborg's done, it's absolutely nothing. She's been subjected to bullying. She's been subjected to things that we can't repeat on this podcast, or actually we probably could, but we won't repeat on this podcast. She's been subjected to different star treatment than someone of her caliber should be getting. And what has she done? Turned around and promoted ESPN Plus, even when it's a boxing event on Twitter. She's been nothing but the best employee to the UFC. I have no idea how she's even able to work there under the conditions that she's described. And I think outside of the Nunes rematch, there's nothing there for her. So if I were advising Cris Cyborg, I'd say go to PFL, make your money, go to One Championship, make your money, and leave it. Your legacy is cemented.
Keith, your thoughts on this? Did we see Cris Cyborg's last fight in the UFC?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, she gave us hope that we could see her continue to fight with the Nunes fight, but I think that fight only happens if somehow Nunes ends up outside of the UFC. The UFC is like the New England Patriots. The brand matters more than the athlete. And the UFC, if you see time and time again, the UFC will not overpay their athletes. They have a set price on it, and certain people don't fit it. And nor should they. The division is so shallow, they don't even have rankings. She is not a pay-per-view buy. I mean, we looked at, 2-40. I think we all know how low those numbers are going to be. And no matter how successful she goes to other organizations, they will still have Amanda Nunes as, she's the best in this organization. Well, you forget that our champion knocked her out in a minute. They've stolen the inevitability and this invincibility about her. So she's going on other podcasts, which I wouldn't listen to, but she went on other podcasts today saying that she wants an apology from Dana White. I mean, you think Dana White's going to apologize? She went on Facebook today and posted all the evil things that Dana White said about her, saying that women shouldn't be treated that way. And I think she's 100% right. She shouldn't be treated that way. No women should be treated that way. And the other organizations want her. I asked Scott Coker about signing her. He said he's very interested. He tweeted afterwards a picture of them together. They had history in Strikeforce holding the belt together. Mike was right about the PFL. Think about this. Kayla Harrison has like 3 fights, and she's the favorite. Imagine Cris Cyborg, and she could win $1 million. She went on today in a podcast saying that she was losing money fighting the UFC, which I think she's exaggerating. I think she got paid like $300,000, but she's losing money. So she wins 5 fights, and she's a millionaire. Rising would make a lot of sense. With her best friend Gabby Garcia over there, she could be fighting like wrestling 50-year-old wrestlers and like knocking them out. The one is trying to expand in America. They talked about it. She would be the face. I mean, she's a bigger name than Eddie Alvarez, Sage Northcutt, Demetrius Johnson. She would be the face of One Championship. And what I really think is a possibility is Ronda Rousey wrestling somebody on pay-per-view, on WrestleMania or Survivor Series or whatever the hell they gave you, and all of a sudden Cris Cyborg comes out and clotheslines her or suplexes her or does some shit, and then she becomes the 2019 version of China, this scary woman who's willing to fight men, and then like 5 years later she gets hot and she's on Playboy. Who knows? Yeah, I just don't think we'll see her in the UFC again. Hey, listen, Davison saying that. They said the same thing about China when she first showed up. She was scary. She was ugly. Then she bought tits. She got a professional makeup artist and all this stuff. And then she was on Playboy.
All right, Craig. Here's something that Dana White does very well. And Keith kind of mentioned it. He is able to take mystique. He is able to take invincibility away, not just with the matchups that he creates, but with the words that he says. He's brilliant when it comes to that. He goes on and talks to Brett Okamoto before Cris Cyborg talks to anybody. And he said, you know what? I think she'd be better off. I think she actually wants to find easier fights outside of the UFC. So he's already laid out that narrative. So if Cris Cyborg leaves, Dana White looks like he's right here. Like Cris Cyborg's going for easier fights. So with that all being said, and all the points that Michael and Keith made for 14 minutes and 35 seconds, what is your take on this? Did we see Cris Cyborg's last fight in the UFC, and why?
So it's really strange because after the fight, a lot of people in the entire narrative that I saw on social media, Cris Cyborg's going to get Amanda Nunes. That makes the most sense. Look, Dana and Cris had a conversation after the fight. That must mean that's what's going to happen. That's not what's happening whatsoever. You see what Cris Cyborg's doing today and she's done after the fight. She's trying to use a little bit of leverage to push the UFC's hand to market her into that fight. It's not going to happen. And Keith and Michael brought up really good points. The only problem I have with the PFL is the fact that you're only allowed a limited number of sponsors on your trunks and on your fight kit. If you go over to Bellator, you can have as many as you want. And I think that's really going to be the big bargaining chip that Bellator is going to have, because where, 50,000, 25,000 here versus 100,000, 100,000, 100,000. And the other big seller for Cris Cyborg, you look at her gym, you look at the Venom Sport partnership, you look at South Coast Mitsubishi, really big sponsor for her. You look at Dunkin' Donuts, a nationally recognized sponsor. So it just keeps adding up the dollar amounts where she can get a tidy little paycheck from Bellator if she moves over there. She gets to fight Julia Budd. They've already had a bit of a rivalry on Twitter. You can make that fight easily. And those sponsorship dollars just start to pour in. So for her, the business decision seems to be, hey, I'm going to market myself in such a way that, hey, the UFC looks bad, I look good. And Scott Coker's a Horizon, and yes, that would be lesser competition. So I think a Bellator move makes a ton of sense. You get to fight for a title in future, and I think that really is the move to make. And the UFC loses here because they lose a division that they barely even put any marketing dollars into, other than, maybe a full 3 or 4 years and a season of The Ultimate Fighter. And they're stuck with fighters like Megan Anderson and Felicia Spencer that you're not going to be able to market at 35. You're not going to be able to market at 25. They're 45 and 55ers. So you're not going to get to push those fighters as much as you would if you kept Cris Cyborg. So really, the UFC, in my opinion, is losing here. And I think Cris Cyborg has everything to gain in this position.
Davidson, we talk position here. Cris Cyborg going on Ariel's show and Cris Cyborg going on the media and saying the things that she's been saying about the bullying and all these things. This has been done before. This is the first time that I recall that she's gone out and said, like, I want a public apology from Dana White himself. So all that being considered, her performance over Felicia Spencer, the numbers she put up, she looked good. She's wearing the Cyborg versus Nunes 2 t-shirt after the fight, was told to remove it before the press conference. Is this it? Like, is this the straw, the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back here? Are we done seeing Cris Cyborg in the octagon?
Here's what broke the proverbial camel's back for me. It's one thing to, quote unquote, bully around a female destroyer like a Cris Cyborg, but whenever I receive telegram of something someone said on some podcast that I don't listen to like everybody else, the thing that moved the bar for me on this topic was when she talked about her child, and when she talked about how, there's going to be punk kids saying things to other kids that have parents that are fighters. But when she brought up the fact that it really deeply bothers her that her own children have to go through basically Dana White's bullying, like, through those kids. I mean, she said on that podcast that I don't listen to, They tease my kid over things Dana said. And then the word brand, I know everybody probably threw it out once or twice in their points, which, I mean, gosh, I hate when everyone makes such good points, but everyone pretty much did. The word brand is so pivotal and important to remember here on both sides, because Cyborg kept saying, my brand, my brand, my brand. Well, hey, guess what? The UFC has a brand to protect too, and they will do it at all costs. They've done it time and time and time again. Now, as far as Cyborg's next potential destination, I don't know how you could be a fan of MMA and could not be enticed by Cyborg weighing in Japan next to the 55-year-old screaming woman that was supposed to fight Gabby Garcia and the walking cup of noodles next to it. That just sounds like a good time to me. I think as far as a competitive standpoint, Bellator would make a lot of sense. PFL, I'd be cool with that, but it's like, do we really need to finance Moriel Charnesky's funeral right now? I don't know if we need to do that. And at the end of the day, I do think Cyborg's done in the UFC. I do think she foreshadowed and gave a lot of, hints, even pre this weekend. She's given absolutely every ounce of credit where credit is certainly due at every moment she gets whenever there's a female 145 fight in Bellator. I mean, it could be Amanda Bell versus Sinead Kavanaugh for God's sake, and she's on Twitter freaking out about it. I think the division means a lot to her. Like I said, I think her brand means a lot to her, and I think, I really, really do not see in any world Dana White apologizing publicly to anyone, let alone a former champion in any weight class, no matter who you are.
Somehow, some way, after 11 minutes and 17 seconds on this topic, Keith Schillen has a rebuttal. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I got to get it out now because the next question is terrible, so I might as well just add in on this. Listen, Davidson actually hit someone when he kept talking about her talking about a brand. Well, no matter where you go, there's only one option where you can really build your brand. It's not Bellator, PFL, Ryzen, whatever. It is WWE. You talk about money and winning $1 million with PFL. John Cena is worth $55 million. So if you want to just talk money, nobody can touch the boys all in Connecticut, Mr. McMahon there. That's where she should go. I mean, she's getting up to their age. She's getting beat up. She got knocked out by, not beat up in the cage, but I mean, like beating up your body training. Just go to and I'm 100% right. Dana White should apologize, whether she goes away or not, just to be a good person. Just the things he said about her. Just imagine if, like, what's that guy from the NBA, the commissioner, the guy who looks like Judge Doom from Roger Rabbit?
Adam Silver.
Adam Silver, yeah. Imagine if that guy started, like, making fun of LeBron James' bald spot or something. Like, if he even made, like, a little side joke about it, he'd probably have to apologize. MMA fighters need to be treated better, and it's appalling that Dana White would say some of the things he said. Now, another reason why she couldn't go to the PFL is she actually makes weight, and PFL fighters seem to not make weight, so she couldn't do that. And the best thing, though, no matter what decision she does, 20 years from now, when no one wants to see her fight again, she can always go bare knuckle boxing route, and people will get excited again. So, and I just want to point out one thing. David kept saying about how excited Cris Cyborg is about the division, except for yesterday when they asked her to name another person in the division, and she couldn't name anybody.
Well, maybe that's a negotiation tactic for her. Maybe it is. You never know. And the thing, just to kind of bounce off of Keith's rebuttal there about WWE, yes, it would be great for her. She'd make good money. She would have limited dates. But the difference between Cris Cyborg and Ronda Rousey is Ronda Rousey's career is over. She does not want anything to do with fighting ever again. We'll never see her fight again. Cris Cyborg wants to continue to fight. She may not want to continue to fight for the UFC, but Cris Cyborg wants to keep fighting. I just don't know if it's the time for her, unless Vince really does write a massive paycheck, which he has been accustomed to doing. I just don't know if, the WWE universe, those kids that they're trying to appeal to, know who Cris Cyborg is. You know what I mean? They don't know who Ronda Rousey is. She transcended the sport. I don't know if they know who Cris Cyborg is. Some of them do. I don't know if everybody will, like they did with Ronda Rousey or Brock Lesnar or whoever. Craig, are you rebuttaling, or is it still retracted?
No, I mean, realistically, that was my whole point. I mean, Keith in the chat's bringing up 5 different names, and there's tons more WWE/wrestling crossovers. I mean, and everybody brought up a good point. They just didn't name who it was. Yumiko Hoda, that was who fought Gabby Garcia, the former, wrestler, and then she fought MMA, and she hadn't fought for years and years. Yeah, a crossover could be made, but Cris Cyborg has plenty of miles left in the tank. We saw that from this fight. That was my whole point. The fact that she fought with reckless abandonment, and she added another tool to her game. She went back to her wrestling base, and she grappled well. She did a good job there. So we can see that she's still gaining momentum in the sport. I believe she could be an actual champion, not a WWE or wrestling champion. She could be a legit MMA champion if she did make the move to, like you said, Ryzen. They could create a belt for her in Ryzen. Or in PFL or in Bellator, she could actually get a real belt. Keith continues to name off more and more wrestling crossover stars, and I just can't believe that there's so many of them out there, but realistically, I mean, she still has more in the tank. And if you're going to commit to one or the other, she has to commit while the getting is good. You also mentioned it in your conversation, and I don't believe this is still a rebuttal, but I'm going to keep going. The fact that Cris Cyborg is really tough to market to wrestling fans. There's not going to be a lot of wrestling fans out there that are going to want to see Cris Cyborg wrestling. They're not really going to know who she is. And I understand, and a name that just popped up, Shayna Baszler, is somebody that, went straight from wrestling into they're straight from MMA into wrestling, and they were able to develop her through that talent program. The problem is Shayna Baszler was an average MMA fighter. Cris Cyborg is an above average MMA fighter that's such a big star in this world that if you go to cross her over into wrestling, it's going to take her time to get into that space. And we saw that with Ronda Rousey. She was able to do it with the time off that she had. But for Cris Cyborg, her window is a little bit longer in MMA, plus her age window in wrestling just isn't quite there. She's not the Undertaker that can go on for 30 years and have fights with shirts popping off and wrinkles falling out and Death Valley just absolutely taking its toll on him. So realistically, to me, Cyborg in wrestling doesn't make a fit right now as it is. I don't think she has that mic presence either to go up against a Ronda Rousey. It's going to be like that Damian Maia, Ben Askren, where Ben Askren's talking to a watermelon, like I keep saying. If you have Cyborg and Rousey, Rousey's going to cut a great promo, and Cyborg just kind of stand there and smile. So I just don't see it happening. He brings up Alberto Del Rio. Are you really looking forward to that fight and combate against Tito Ortiz? Keith, come on now. Rebuttal over.
Keith, you know a lot about wrestling for a non-wrestling fan. You named a lot of names there. That's great. And one thing about Shayna Baszler is she got the respect because she worked her ass off to get there, and she's a great professional wrestler. That's why she's doing well. But to go back to MMA and go back to Cris Cyborg in MMA, because I don't think she's going WWE anytime soon. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's play a quick buy or sell before we go to the next theme. Michael, buy or sell that Bellator is the favorite for Cris Cyborg?
I'm going to buy just because Cyborg seems very intense on legacy and fighting the best, and that's the best division for women's featherweights in MMA.
Keith, same question to you in as few of words as possible.
Bye.
Craig, same question to you.
Wrote an article 2 weeks about it. Bye.
Davidson?
I think it ultimately depends who gives her the most money, but without looking at any type of figures, I'm going to buy that as well.
All right, we got 28 points apiece for Davidson, 28 for Michael, 28 for Craig, and 27 for Keith. Close battle. That was a good one. And Keith hates this question. I don't know why, but we're going to play a new game, a new little game show here on the program. It's called Do You Believe Dana White When He Says Blank? That's what we're going to do. First off, let's start with this. In an interview with Aaron Bronstetter over the weekend, Dana White shook up the MMA social media world when he announced that BJ Penn will return to the octagon once again, and he will fight Nick Lentz at a future event to be named later. Now, if you missed the aforementioned show that none of us listen to because it's not on the podcast network, that starts airing at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on ESPN, Nick had talked about BJ for years harassing him, harassing his wife, and this is a very personal fight for Nick Lentz. When it comes to BJ Penn, Dana White said BJ Penn was bugging him for about a week straight, and he sold Dana White on this idea to give him one more fight or another fight. And under the big condition here, and Dana White said this a lot on Saturday, is that win, lose, or draw, this will be the final time we see him in the UFC. He even threw out the word retire on a couple of different occasions. But in terms of what Dana said, and he has no control of what BJ Penn does after this fight, after he said, I mean, in terms of if he can go somewhere else, after he said BJ Penn will never fight in the UFC again after his last fight with Clay Guida, he said, we'll never see him again. We believe Dana White. Dana White comes out, and now he's got another fight with Nick Lentz. Do we believe him now that this is his last fight, that this will be the last time BJ Penn graces the octagon, win, lose, or draw? Keith, we'll start with you.
Do I believe Dana White? I mean, that's a tough question. I believe him on this one topic. I do believe him. Even though Cris Cyborg has called him a liar like 20 times today. BJ Penn is 40 years old. I start worrying about commissions not sanctioning him after he loses. I mean, Nick Lentz is going to beat him. He's going to lose his 8th fight in a row. But the biggest reason why I can't see BJ Penn fight is nobody wants to see him fight. There was some people who wanted to see CM Punk fight. There was people. There's like a very small window of people who want to see Tito Ortiz fight. I don't know anybody who wants to see BJ Penn fight. If you're a longtime fan, you remember the prime of BJ Penn. You're sad to see him losing to Dennis Seaver and Nick Lentz and guys that at one time would have been taken out in mere minutes by BJ Penn. And then if you're a young fan, came in at the Rousey era, the Conor McGregor era, you don't know who BJ Penn is, or you didn't watch him live. You didn't get excited to see what he could do in the cage. So all you see is this like this kind of skinny, fat Hawaiian guy who looks like a Cabbage Patch Kid. That people are excited. Like, why am I excited to see this guy lose for almost double-digit fights in a row now? So I can't see when they do it. But the biggest thing, as Mike Bond pointed out, is how much significant damage BJ Penn has taken with 2 boxers dying this week from the amount of damage taken. Imagine if BJ Penn gets beat up so bad that he actually dies. Imagine the backlash Dana White would get with all these people saying, hey, he shouldn't be fighting. Why are you putting him in there? I think that was terrible. And I actually do believe Dana White. But I don't, even if he doesn't fight, Dana White said it during the press conference, he can't control if he goes somewhere else. A different organization probably take him. Stupid bare knuckle boxing would take him, and bare knuckle boxing idiots would cheer it on. So yeah, sadly enough, BJ Penn will keep fighting.
Craig, this BJ Penn situation is just so crazy. It's so strange. His legacy continues to diminish, even though he did so many great things. What if he goes out and starches Nick Lentz? What if he goes out and beats Nick Lentz and submits him, knocks him out, whatever, in like 2 minutes? Then what happens? Do you believe Dana White? Win, lose, or draw, no matter what happens when they fight, we're not going to see BJ Penn fight in the UFC again.
Listen, I don't think that's going to happen in a million years. The only person to finish Nick Lentz since 2012 is Evan Dunham and then Charles Oliveira twice. And you look at Nick Lentz right now, I mean, he's one of those guys that's probably, like, I think of him as a 20 to 15. Realistically, he's probably a 20 to 25 guy. He's knocking on the door. He's getting wins over Scott Holtzman. And you look at the last guy that he retired was Gray Maynard. And we remember Gray Maynard for all the great fights that he had. And he said, yeah, if you're a fan that came into the McGregor-Rousey era, you might not remember him, BJ Penn, that is, for all the great things that he did. And for me, it's kind of awkward because I came into it with BJ Penn losing, but it was to George St. Pierre. He went on to win some more and lose some more, but he was never really in that same category as if you were an MMA fan that started him, let's say 2001 or 2002, when he broke onto the scene. He was MMA Rookie of the Year. He was coming off those BJJ wins, and he was an absolute champ back then. But now it's just kind of awkward. And for me, I think Nick Lentz is going to be the type of guy that's going to finish him, like horribly. He's going to be the type of guy that goes out there and gets a knockout. I think it's absolutely reckless that Dana White would let this happen. Look back to recent memory where he wouldn't let Chuck Liddell have any more fights in the UFC and paid him to be an ambassador. I wish that's what Dana White would do here. But just to answer the question, do I think that this is his last fight? If you look at it, I mean, bare knuckle boxing just signed Alexander Emelianenko. There's talks, that Alexander Emelianenko could fight in the United States. And as far-fetched as I think it is, those reports continue to gain traction. I'm sure they take a guy like BJ Penn. It makes me, I'm actually sick to my stomach right now talking about this, but I think it's an absolute possibility that could happen. So I will agree with Keith and say that, and I hope this is his last fight in the UFC, and I believe Dana White.
All right, Davidson, what do you think? Do you believe Dana White? I mean, this is a recency bias type sport. BJ Penn's probably going to go in there as a plus 1,200 underdog heading into this fight. But let's just say lightning strikes for BJ Penn once again, and he finishes Nick Lentz, and he has the best performance he's had in a decade. Do you believe Dana White then?
Keith even said it himself. Believe is just a statement in which you cringe. It's like, I can't believe I just said I believe, the words that came out of Dana White's mouth. However, I mean, in this one instance, it's hard to imagine that he is making up any type of fallacy or story or myth or any type of half-witted lie that he, occasionally or even often speaks all the time. And as a fight promoter, you have to lie sometimes in this business. You have to, as we've already noted earlier, Cyborg was never scared of Amanda Nunes. Dana White came out and said that because there was some sort of negotiation ploy. Dana White will always say things, but I do believe him here, and here's why. I don't think it comes all the way back to the brand. It comes all the way back, once again, to the UFC putting their brand over everything. Do we really think Dana White wants to trot out an 8-fight skid BJ Penn? No, I don't. I honestly think Dana even feels a little bit bad. They matched him up against Yair Rodriguez just 2 years ago, for God's sakes. what reason would Dana have to continue to book him? What reason? Who the hell is he going to fight? As far as I'm concerned, if BJ wants to continue to fight after this, I'm sure that Golden Boy MMA's open weight tournament could see him fighting Butterbean in the first round. But other than that, I don't know how your moral compass, as a fight promoter or not, as a human being. Lou DiBella said it today on that one podcast that I don't listen to. You do not cause so much damage to one fighter, one person, one individual. Like Deontay Wilder is not going to kill somebody by landing a right hand. You obtain serious damage by constant, overwhelming, and continuous beatings, and that's exactly what BJ Penn has got. And I think Dana and BJ have known each other for a long time, and I think Dana has, at least in some respect, kind of been woken up by this in a way.
Michael, I'm going to go to you because, it is my job as the host of this program to put out different scenarios to see, whether things will change. Now, obviously, it is one thing to want to believe Dana White. It's another thing to actually believe him. So let's just say, let's add the cherry on top of this proverbial sundae here. Let's say BJ Penn goes out there and has a remarkable performance, and everyone on Twitter is like, oh my God, BJ Penn is back, like the recency bias thing. And then let's just say, 6 months later, the UFC finally goes to Hawaii. Do you see a world where Dana White leaves BJ Penn off that card if he has a great performance against Nick Lentz?
This is such a tough one because I want to answer this directly, but I feel like it's so difficult to do that because on the one hand, I really do hope that I can believe him. I really do hope that this is the wake-up call, and I really do hope that Dana understands that even if there are people who want to see BJ continue to fight, it's not worth the damage he's taking, like the Liddell situation. So I really hope that I can believe him. But if the UFC goes to Hawaii, if they're able to work out with the tourism board, because there's some money at play, if they're able to figure that out, I don't know if I can see him not putting BJ on the card. But what I would say is that I hope and I pray that that's the start of the UFC's combat jiu-jitsu league, where they can find a way for BJ to compete in either jiu-jitsu or combat jiu-jitsu. They have Eddie Bravo with the EBI combat jiu-jitsu and the combat jiu-jitsu invitational. Put him in something where he's not going to get hit in the head, but he's allowed to still compete. We heard Perillo talk, and he said he likes BJ better, and he thinks BJ's better when he has something to work forward to, when he has a fight in the works, and that it's better for BJ, which is a scary thought as well. But if he can do something like jiu-jitsu, combat jiu-jitsu, where he can get paid, he can compete, he can do all that, but not take the head strikes, I'm all for it.
All right. We're going to, it was interesting because it all came down to this question to see where elimination was going to go. And for a few minutes there, it was looking pretty good. Oh, wait a minute. Craig Allen wants to rebuttal. Is this the right thing to do, Craig? Go ahead.
No, I feel like I'm cruising for a win. Last week, again, the slap hits didn't get it for me. But this time, I just want to go back to something that Davidson said. I tossed a rebuttal out there early. The problem I have with what you said is the fact that he's on a 7-fight losing streak. What does one more loss do in that category? It does absolutely nothing. The guy's 1-9-1 in his last 11. The draw against John Fitch, you can say whatever you want. But realistically, 8 fights and 7 fights in the loss column doesn't mean anything at this point. So realistically, Dana White's got to bite the bullet, and enough's enough. So after this Nick Lentz fight, yeah, you got to say, I'm throwing in the towel. Maybe BJ Penn goes home, competes for one of the promotions on the island, gets the fight there for those hometown fans. But hopefully Bellator, everybody, there's a pact just not to sign him. But there's always a guy out there like your Oscar De La Hoya or your David Feldman that's going to go, hey, the ink's not dry. Let's sign him. Come on, let's do it. So hopefully it doesn't come to that. But I really do believe that the amount of losses don't matter at this point. It's just Dana White's and BJ Penn's stubbornness to make this fight that really matter.
All right, I have a few comments to make. One is I'm going to allow this rebuttal because Craig did what Keith would normally do on a follow-up and turn that follow-up into a rebuttal. I asked him actually straight up, are you rebuttaling or not? And he just gave an answer based on my question. So technically, he didn't use his rebuttal. Keith, you are familiar with that. You've used that tactic on a number of occasions as well. The other thing is Craig's rebuttal had nothing to do with the scoring. It had nothing to do with where the scoring was going. It didn't change a thing. And the thing I was mentioning before Craig threw out his rebuttal was Keith needed a 10-pointer to stay alive here. And he was looking pretty good. He was looking real good. Like we're going to have a 4-way going into the final question. But Michael Fiedel stole the thunder and gets the 10 points. So for the first time, I think, in the history of this iteration of the program, and it's been pretty darn good. This is like a 10-game stretch for Keith, making it at least to the next round. We're going to say goodbye to him. Keith, how you feeling, buddy? I apologize. That's just the way that the cookie crumbles sometimes.
Well, listen, I sandbagged it on purpose. I don't get paid enough for the show, so I sandbagged it. And I like Mike. I like Mike a lot. And the dude needs to win. And if I'm in the finals, he's not going to win. The guy doesn't win at anything in life. So I figured I'd eliminate myself early, give him the best chance possible. But more importantly, I had to leave early because I have to go to my WWE podcast.
Make sure you check that out on wherever you find your favorite podcast. Yeah,
there are other podcasts.
WW Keith.
Oh, that's smart.
Yeah, look about that. All right, so we're down to the final question of regulation. Is our game show? Do you believe Dana White when he says blank continues? Because this Saturday the UFC returns to the rolling hills and sprawling landscapes of beautiful Newark, New Jersey for a matinee. How about that? I'm very excited about this. The main event. We'll see Colby Covington take on Robbie Lawler at the Peru. And at the post-fight press conference on Saturday night, Dana White was asked to give us some clarity when it comes to the 170-pound title picture. We talked about this a couple of times on the show when it comes to who should be next for Kamaru Usman. But we're not Dana White. We're not the matchmakers. We don't make those decisions. But Dana White said on Saturday that if Colby Covington gets a win over Robbie Lawler on Saturday, he will fight Kamaru Usman next. Not Jorge Masvidal, not Tyron Woodley. It will be Colby Covington. So, do you believe Dana White when he says that if Colby Covington wins on Saturday, he is next for a shot at the title, that he will fight Kamaru Usman after this? Craig, we start with you.
And listen, I'm glad we do, and I'm going to point out a stat that I like to point out when Keith's on the show. But Keith's no longer on the show, so you guys can attack me for this. You can't attack the numbers. So I looked at it for Canada, I looked at it for the United States. And if you look on Google Trends, which, listen, I don't control the UFC's algorithm, but I'm sure this plays a big part into it somehow. You look at the trend over the past 12 months, and there's blips for Lawler. There's actually Lawler's in second. There's a blip for Covington. There's a blip for Kamaru Usman. There's a giant blip into this summer. Jorge Masvidal leads the pack over anybody. Also, the second biggest blip, Jorge Masvidal early on this spring. So Jorge Masvidal leads in every single trend going. It's the biggest search topic in the United States at this point in the UFC in this year. It's bigger than anything else to this point. You can't deny that guy a title shot. I mean, Jorge Masvidal is putting butts in seats. He's selling tickets right now. Who the hell is buying tickets for this UFC Fight Night Newark? It's an ESPN card. Nobody's going to watch it. It's such a poor card. I mean, what are people getting excited for this weekend? Antonina Shevchenko, Lucy Pudilova. Pudilova could barely sell a card in her own country of Czech Republic. Mickey Gall versus Salim Touahri. I know you guys are excited for this, but am I? Not so much. Hannah Goldie, Miranda Granger. You guys have done great work on this fight. Nobody's buying this card. Nobody's putting down their hard-earned dollars for this. And, of course, at the top, we have Jim Miller and Clay Guida. Again, nobody's excited about it. Colby Covington, Robbie Lawler. Yeah, there might be title implications, but in this one, I don't believe Dana. Realistically, the way the numbers work, I don't believe it. As far as rankings are concerned, I don't believe it. Covington's got one more fight. Lawler's ranked 11th. He's probably got 2 or 3 more fights to a title. So no, realistically, I don't believe that either guy deserves a title shot off a win here.
Davidson Baker, do you believe Dana White when he says that if Colby Covington beats Robbie Lawler on Saturday, he will fight Kamaru Usman? He will be Kamaru Usman's first title defense.
Again, I don't know if it's a matter of I can't really listen to anything Dana says. Like Dana could be like, "Your name is Davidson," and I would be like really? Like, are we sure? Are you positive? I just don't know if I can take in stride, word for word, anything that comes out of his mouth because, like I previously touched on, it's kind of the nature of his job, but that's beside the point. As far as this situation is concerned, Craig, I love you. I just cannot believe that you just said Jorge Masvidal is by far and away the only guy that deserves a title shot. Last time I checked, 6 wins is a lot more than 2 wins. And Jorge Masvidal, as phenomenal as he's looked, and the needle that he has moved, proverbially so, Leon Edwards, and while I'll touch on this for people that might be listening audio only, Leon Edwards does have a lot of wins in a row, but Leon Edwards did not fight anyone inside of the top 12 until just now. And he, like I said in last week's episode, he got on the mic and was like, I put him away. He's not getting a title shot anytime soon based on all of that. Anyway, Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman is the fight to make for more than one reason. If you want to talk about moving the needle, there's beef there. There's history there. There is a matchup in which I think that we have a stalemate. You have a pressure fighter against a pressure fighter that excels in grappling against one that excels in grappling. I actually think Usman is a bad matchup for Masvidal. I'm not saying the UFC is protecting Masvidal. I don't think he is like at that proverbial cash cow level yet. But again, I don't know if I could just be like, I believe you, Dana White. But it's also a matter of, does that fight make the most sense, especially if Covington comes out of this unscathed? You know, there's been rumors going around today about the main event in Madison Square Garden. Covington and Usman can provide you a pretty juicy co-main as well. I'm not saying Masvidal Usman sucks as a fight. However, Covington and Usman have unfinished business. Covington and Usman, outside of Leon Edwards and Eliseo Zaleski dos Santos, have the most lucrative winning streaks in the division. Again, do I believe him? Cringe to say that. Do I think that that's the right decision? Do I think that that's the right move? Should Colby Covington get out of this weekend relatively unscathed? Yes, I do.
In terms of the MSG rumored main event, I have reached out to people. I've not heard anything back in terms of whether or not that is true. I will say, unless they are paying Conor McGregor like trillions of dollars, I just don't see a world where he takes that fight. I just don't. A fight I do see him taking, however, is a fight with Jorge Masvidal, just because, and this I do believe Dana White when he says, when Dana White comes out and says, oh, Masvidal is too big for him, that's only going to make Conor want it more. And plus, there's a lot of money attached to that fight. So I can see a world where Masvidal is going to fight Conor McGregor. I'd rather see Masvidal fight Leon Edwards. I think that fight would do really well, and it gives an opportunity, for Leon Edwards to move up a little bit in terms of popularity in the internet trends. But in terms of whether or not we believe Dana White when he says Colby Covington is next, Michael, what do you think? Do you believe him?
Yes, I do. And I can't believe I just said that out loud, and I'm already immediately regretting it. But let me explain why. I do think that Colby Covington has the best chance and the best case for a title. This is a guy who earned his title shot. He earned the interim title and only had it stripped away from him because the UFC's insane schedule and artificially mandated, I might add, need for a title fight on every pay-per-view kept him from unifying the title with Tyron Woodley. I think that was a money fight and could have been a main event of a relatively minor to medium pay-per-view. And I do think it could have been a co-main on virtually any pay-per-view. And I think the same kind of dynamic returns with the Colby fight with Kamaru Usman. I think you have that political dichotomy between the two. I think you have two styles that otherwise wouldn't be the most necessarily sellable, but I think you're able to work with it because Colby's such an outspoken heel and because of Kamaru's newfound fame after beating Woodley. And I would like to point out, along with Craig and Davidson's points about ratings and money with Masvidal, you can have Masvidal fight Leon Edwards and still get the ratings, and you can have Jorge Masvidal fight Conor McGregor and still get the money. So if we left with just the meritocracy of it, I think that it belongs to Colby Covington. But because I know there's a rebuttal there, the meritocracy isn't always the case in the UFC. So we'll see. I think if Colby's able to get a finish or a dominant win, he's sealed the deal, but I don't know.
Yeah, I actually think I do believe him on this one, just because Colby's doing him a massive favor here by taking this fight, because what if he didn't take this fight? And that's Jim Miller versus Clay Guida is the main event for Saturday. But that's where we're at right now as we get ready to head to the finals, and it's going to be a battle between Michael Fiedel and Davidson Baker. Craig had a great performance. He just didn't have enough points to really move that proverbial needle. Although you are trending on Google Trends right now, Craig. How about that?
Cash me outside. How about that? You know what? I'm surprised I made it this far because I had to switch from a computer to a camera on my phone, and then that didn't work due to an internet connection problem. So I've been on LTE the whole time. But listen, great episode. And again, I'm going to give props to Michael Fiedel like I did with Nick Baldwin last weekend. But this is Davidson Baker's episode. He's coming on strong every single week, and I think he's got a really good shot at winning. So good luck to you, sir. And another great episode in the books.
Thank you, Craig. Always a pleasure. Just becoming a rising star here on this program. Now on kind of television on the internet. But before we kick off the final round, we got to pay some bills. You know, it's the broadcast world. But here is a friendly reminder to subscribe to the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network, because not only will you get this magical show, you get the whole catalog of greatness. So, for instance, have you ever noticed that Corey Anderson has big nipples? I didn't, but Fred Kirby certainly has. And you can get those bits of knowledge and much more as Kyle and Fred present the Not Safe for Work MMA show. You also get breakdown shows with Max Friedman and Marcel Dorff every week, as they'll be previewing UFC Newark coming up on Saturday. And, of course, the Sunday morning cornerman with Keith Schillen and John Franklin as they break down the action from the day or night prior. All that and much more on the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network. So subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, SoundCloud, or whatever it is you find your favorite podcast as we head to the final question. And I haven't done this in the last few weeks, but I'm bringing it back because I think that matters. I think the order of the final question matters. So we have Michael taking on Davidson. But before we get to the question, Davidson, pick a number between 1 and 20.
7.
And Michael, pick a number between 1 and 20.
17.
All right. Since you guys are both 5 off of my number of 12, we're going to do Price is Right rules. Davidson, you get it. With 7, the number was 12. There was 5 away on each side. So, Davidson, with that, would you like to exercise your option to answer this question first, or allow Michael to go first and you kind of, hold the baton on the last spot?
Mr. Vanderbilt Commodore himself can go first.
Oh, all right. It's like the final battle in 8 Mile here. And, to preface this question, I'm only human. I tried to work today and pump out some articles and do some interviews while also trying to amuse my 6-year-old son all day since his daycare is off for the next couple of weeks. So until John Franklin reminded me of this, I didn't have a final question ready until a couple of hours ago. Of course, I'm going to also say that there are many, many, many more interesting questions out there, many more interesting topics we can discuss, but this is what we're doing because I'm a storyline nerd. I love storylines. I'm an old pro wrestling guy. I love storylines. And UFC Newark is coming up on Saturday, and there were some points made about this card being weak. I mean, obviously there's some interesting fights. We have a really intriguing main event, but if you look at this card, there's potentially a lot of things that may be flying under the radar. So, gentlemen, and we'll start with Michael Fiedel here, the question is, what is the under-the-radar storyline, in your opinion, heading into Saturday afternoon's event in Newark, New Jersey?
Well, it's an interesting question, and it's one that I definitely wouldn't have been able to prepare for, so it's an exciting one. I do feel as though I need to start dissing myself because it's 8 Mile, and I need to get those out of the way before my opponent goes second. But in lieu of doing so, I would like to say I think my storyline is the resurgence of Jim Miller. I think that coming off of Lyme disease, he spoke about how it was so draining for him, both emotionally and physically. He wasn't able to cut weight as well. He wasn't able to train as long. He was tired. He was losing. But now he's on his way back. He's gone treatment. He's back in the win column. And I think the fight with Clay Guida is a good opportunity for him. Obviously, Guida's by no means out the door yet, but he's definitely on the tail end of his career. So I think a win for Jim Miller, while it wouldn't mean the most, would be a big step for him. Another name to his resume. I can't believe these two guys haven't fought before. So I think that's going to be a good fight, even though they're both a little bit too far out of their prime. But I think it's a fun one, and I think it's one that, when you have one guy who is in a Hall of Fame fight for the UFC, you know something's bound to happen. So that's all I got.
I will say, to add on to what you just said, I think this fight's going to be bananas. I think it's going to be a great fight. I don't think anybody's really talking about it right now. Some people are poo-pooing it. They're just like, it's there. Why is this a co-main event? But I think when it's over, I think people are going to be like, that's why it was a co-main event. I mean, I was in Brooklyn covering UFC 208, which was one of the worst cards ever. And thank God for Jim Miller fighting Dustin Poirier on that card. I mean, this is 2 years ago. Jim Miller went in there with Dustin Poirier and hung around and had a really exciting fight with him. So, you know, as seasoned as these gentlemen are, this is going to be a fun fight. But Davidson Baker, for you, what is your under-the-radar storyline?
A great question, too, because it's difficult to come up with one. When you look at when you scratch the surface of this card, you do see, big ESPN, matinee showing. Still don't know why they're doing that, by the way. Would love to be entertained as to why. But regardless, as far as under-the-radar storylines go, they are few and far between here. For me, I got to say, the way that obviously linear ESPN is the way to the gateway to the quote-unquote casual's hearts, and you're not going to convince a casual to watch Darko Stosic versus Kennedy Nzechukwu and have them sold. However, I do think that one big storyline in this fight is, in fact, headlined by Colby Covington and Robbie Lawler. Most people that are in the proverbial MMA sphere know who those two guys are. And then from there on down, you have, obviously, Guida and Miller, as he mentioned. And then after that, it's not even a lot of Contender Series guys, but a lot of bright, up-and-coming talent and a lot of big-time future prospects that I think the UFC has strategically placed in this position to be on such a platform like linear ESPN. As tantalizing of a storyline as that is, I think that's kind of what's happening here. Joaquim Silva and Nasrat Haqparast is the third fight up from the top, and as you know, Craig mentioned earlier about what is top 25, top 30 at lightweight, Tapology doesn't even have Joaquim Silva ranked in the top 50 at lightweight. That is how good this weight class is. I think the UFC is trying to do some sort of underlying of potential up-and-coming talent. Obviously, you have Nasrat Haqparast, who is considered to be the next big thing at 155. You know, maybe a big measuring stick somewhat for a guy like Mickey Gall. You have the sister of flyweight champion Valentina Shevchenko, Antonina Shevchenko, Trevin Giles, even though he's coming off a loss, is still 11-1 and a good prospect at 185. That's what jumps off the page to me, is there are a lot of names that are, 2-0, 3-0, 3-1, 2-1 in the UFC. And while that's not, as appealing as other storylines might be, it's, like I said, you lobbed us up a good one here, Mike, and there are very few and far between things to look forward to for the casual fan and such. And that's why I think, like I said, I think they've strategically placed a lot of up-and-coming guys that we might not see graze the top 15 soon, but, give it about a year or two down the line, maybe we see guys like a Haqparast or maybe even a Darko Stosic reach that plateau.
All right. Interesting answers. I'm fascinated about the Mickey Gall situation to see if he can bounce back. I mean, this is a guy that was cruising along. Maybe the competition wasn't great. He beat Sage Northcutt, and then has the setback with Brandy Brown, has the setback with Diego Sanchez. He had kidney failure in that fight, and now he's coming in on short notice to fight in his home state. So this is an interesting opportunity for him. There are a lot of interesting storylines, and I do like the Hannah Goldie versus Miranda Granger fight. I think that's going to be a barn burner. I love that matchup. I think both of these women deserve to be in the UFC, so I like that matchup a lot. But at the end of the day, the term always the bridesmaid, never the bride. That's kind of where Davidson's at right now. It was a competitive battle, but in the end, got to give it to Michael Fiedel. Michael gets the job done. The last time I was on the show with him, me and Michael were in the finals, and we had a battle, and there was this great scene where Michael's screen froze, and I couldn't get the rest of his answer. My eyes opened so wide that it was unbelievable, but it all comes full circle, and Michael Fiedel gets the job done in a squeaker. So, Michael, you've said you've listened to the show, so now you have 30 seconds to talk about whatever it is you want in the sport of mixed martial arts. Good, bad, indifferent, something you want to get off your chest. I mean, you've written some great stories over these last few days that we could touch on as well, so the floor is yours, my man.
Thank you so much. So I just wanted to say thank you to Davidson. He made great points throughout the show. And a lot of the time I was thankful that I was going after him because I could use some of his material to form my own opinions, which was fantastic. Mike, thank you as well. John, thank you as well for having me on the show. It's been great. I just wanted to say it's been a really fun week in terms of reporting. Got a lot of stuff out there, and it's been received well. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who sent a nice word or a message my way. It means a lot.
All right, and Davidson, I'm not a poor sport. You know, if you've listened to the remainder of the programs, you know that I like to give, you know, some time to the runner-up as well. So go ahead, my man. What do you want to say to the peeps?
4-time between the links runner-up, man. 4-time runner-up. No, but I sent in the chat, and when we said in the group chat earlier this week, I mean, the first name, so I forget who it was, but the first name somebody threw out was Michaels, and you know, one of the brightest futures, obviously, in MMA. And like I said in this chat, if I would have been the winner tonight, even though deservedly so, Michael getting the crown for the time being, I would have, you know, taken my little bit of time. I like I said before, I was really intrigued by the whole situation that went down with Battlefield FC. And as Mr. Mike Heck and Mr. Mike Fiedel both know, the Body Lock did a phenomenal job and does a phenomenal job as a whole, covering all of that. I read every word of that whole entire situation that's going on. And yeah, I'm not even going to lie. That's what I was going to touch on had I won. So it's good that comes full circle. And yeah, that's about it for me.
And there you have it. What an exciting, seamless episode of the show. Even with Craig's, you know, dealings with technology, it worked out for the best. I hope it turns into good video on YouTube. I think John Franklin might have a little bit of work ahead of him, but you know, he's the man. He can get it done. So I want to thank you once again to John Franklin for his work and his diligence here on the program. And that's it. So make sure you subscribe to the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network. Get these shows immediately upon release. And I want to thank you all for listening to this week's show. For Michael, Davidson, Craig, and Keith, I am Mike Heck. We'll see you next week as we go back between the links.